so much for stopping by. This is Larry DeBose at DeBoseWoodworking.com. Built better, built to last. I'm here today to show you how to make a box and to build it in just that way where it's better and it's made to last, to be passed on to the next generation if they're able to get that. Years ago, it was said that Martin Luther was asked what he'd do if he knew the world would end today, and he said he'd plant a tree using that same philosophy. Now, it's argued whether or not that actually went to him, but that same philosophy is make things that are going to be enjoyed by other people after you and that are going to be a blessing to them, and that's what I strive to do in the different pieces I make. I look at the best quality of being able to make that, making solid materials, and allowing people to have something that's just going to be a nice work of art for them. I put these boxes together in 4 different species of wood. I have cherry, hard maple, white oak, and sycamore. I left out a few steps in this video. I actually didn't start thinking of filming it until later on, but obviously I had to cut all of the pieces and mill them to thickness and to length, and then I had to cut up the dovetails and then groove the species. But here it is where they are in their unfinished state and they're all grooved out and they're ready for the next step. So we'll see what that is. So we're jumping into this video about the halfway point, and also the halfway point is going to be how we're going to make the cuts on this box in order to get it open. So I'm going to cut through on the inside about halfway, and then on the outside I'm going to offset that on the table saw just about 1/8 of an inch, about the thickness of the blade. Cut through other halfway of that. I'm going to use my calipers in order to get that dialed in just right. Is another illustration of what I'm describing here. If you look at both pieces here on this test scrap, you're going to find that that saw is going halfway through, and then the blade is going to be a little bit different in height, and then it's going halfway through on the other side. The issue if I ran that whole cut on the table saw would be what you're going to find on the screen right here. You have this unsightly square that's showing that cut has made it all the way through. So to get around doing that, set that first cup on a router bit, and then go about 1/4 inch from an end, stop, and then that's going to allow you to make that cut, and you're not going to see anything from the outside or try to have to patch something that's never going to look quite right afterwards. This was also good for proof of concept to see that that inside cut I needed to bring up a little bit higher, that outside cut to be just a little bit lower, so that I'm going to have a lip around the box sides that top is going to be able to fit around. You'll also notice that one side of the boxes here has blue pencil on it. Wanted a real clear marking. Once I assemble everything, I can't see where I've done that groove. I'm going to need to cut away to make that box top, and that's going to be my marker there, so I want to make sure everything's aligned. And then go ahead, sand everything to 150 grit on the inside, 120, 150 with the random orbital. Now coming back, only applying glue to one of the surfaces here. If I do too much, I'm going to get squeeze out, and it's going to be a mess to clean up. Be real hard to get that just right. So just a little bit on the face of the tails here and in those grooves there. Go ahead, clamp everything up real good. Dovetail already is so strong that I'm not going to have problems with it pulling away one direction. Glue's going to hold it the other direction, and since there's no force that's going to be applied to this over time, I don't need to do anything more than put it in the clamps for about an hour or so. I use Titebond II here. So since I had everything dialed in earlier, I'm going to go ahead and make my cuts. I already made sure with the test piece I had my offset right. So I go through each side there. Last side, I want to be real careful that I don't pinch that blade. I don't bind anything up there. Only going a little less than 1/4 inch high, but still want to be real careful with what we have with the table saw. You can see this X-Acto knife coming in here in order to make the rest of the cut through the box and to have that be one nice continuous grain all the way through. You're also going to notice the table saw surface itself is a mess. So what happened on a different project is I went across the surface with the yellow frog tape. The reason I used it is I needed to pre-finish the shelves that I was making in order to get everything to fit together. Since it was pre-finished, anything I ran over to the table saw was going to leave scratches in the surface. To avoid that, what I needed to do was put yellow tape all over the surface. That would allow it to go across smoothly. If you guys have a better trick or tip for doing something in a situation like that, let me know. I'd be glad to hear. So I've left some of that tape on. It's worn off over time, but it hasn't made any problems for other stuff I've done, and that's why I've left it on. Now we're test fitting that, seeing how those boxes are fitting together, making sure the grain is all good. Now addressing a problem I had with the router bit. I pulled that out when I was making the dovetails. That ended up messing up the dovetail. In order to fix that, what I need to do is come back through, square up that with the chisel, which I didn't show, but I came back, cut some pieces with that same hard maple, made them in the wedge shape, and then drive that in with some Titebond II. Here's the board that I used to cut those from. Get those real nice and precise. Knock those in there, a little bit of the glue, and come back with a block plane, get everything leveled off, sanded to the final thing. You'll see it at the end when you're looking for it, but I'll show you the blend at the end. It turned out pretty decent. This really does end up being one of the optimum repairs. Is going to be used the same species of wood, hopefully the same board and that same grain. Get that into patch anything you've messed up. Way more easy to do, and it looks better than if you're using any type of wood filler. I got all those lids squared away. The next order of business was to clean up each one of the burn marks on the box tops. I did that with a card scraper, and I found that this was the best way. It helped keep the surface level. If I used a sanding block, I found that process was pretty slow going. Random orbital could work here. My concern if I used a random orbital was that I was going to start to dish out one side of that, and then once the box would sit down, it would not look flush. So this worked pretty quickly. Went through each one of the species, and I was happy with how that process turned out. When I needed to transition over into the boxes themselves, I switched over to a shoulder plane and had that dialed in, and that did a great job getting all the burn marks cleaned up, having a nice surface that, I real lightly touched that with sandpaper at the end, 180 grit, but besides that, it left a nice surface. I have heard of guys when these are not working properly that are going to go ahead and put some denatured alcohol on the surface, and that's going to allow the block plane, the shoulder plane, whatever plane to move better. Also, just to show you an illustration here, you hold it, it's going to be a little bit harder to get a nice plain surface on that. When you have a nice bench or area to clamp that into, it's just going to plane that much better. When I started using hand planes, what I found was I just could not get that to make any decent type of shavings. But once I had that piece secured, and I could put my body weight and start to put just force into that, it would make real nice shavings, and it wasn't the plane at all. It was just the surface I didn't have that mounted into a nice, heavy, solid bench. So you have problems, that could be something to look into on that end. As soon as I cleaned up each one of the burn marks on the boxes, I went over the outside and 120, 150, 180 grit on a random orbital sander. Cleaned up all of those surfaces, came back with a sanding block and 180 grit to break all of the hard edges on each one of the boxes. And after looking everything over, felt more than comfortable putting my name on each one of these boxes, went over the surface with branding iron, and after that, it was on to the finishing room. One of my favorite finishes to go to on a project like this is going to be a 100% pure tung oil. It doesn't have any of the metallic additives. Then I cut it with an equal part of citrus solvent blend. So these are both going to be all natural materials. It's going to harden over time. It's food safe, and it soaks into the wood. It's just not on the surface, but it starts to actually penetrate. The citrus solvent gets it into the grain, and it gives it protection from water underneath of the surface. It's not going to be the hardest finish that's going to be out there. There is going to be other stuff that is out there, but something that is just going to be not exposed to a lot of wear and tear. This is helping that grain really pop. I love the way it finishes, so Real easy to put on. It's foolproof pretty much. You just wipe it on. I use a cotton rag, let it sit a few minutes, come back, buff it off with another cotton rag, wait a day or two, wash, rinse, repeat. Another day or two, you can go 3 to 5 coats. Will give you plenty of protection. After that time, I'm going to go back with 2000 grit sandpaper, really nicely buff up the surface. And then after that, it says about 30 days to cure, so it's getting harder each day as time goes by. So if you can wait for it, it is a really, really nice finish to work with. And what you've all been waiting for is going to be some of the shots right here at the end once these are all finished. Now let's check on that dovetail that we had to repair and see how that finished up. It does show up, but it blends in pretty well. You will notice it's always going to stand out more to you than to anyone else, and if it does that to you and others aren't noticing, that's a good sign.